Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share, and restack buttons. Well, this is complete insanity, what we're seeing take place right now. But first, just a quick reminder, in case you missed it, make sure to check out the latest article over on the Substack at brittgillette.substack.com. Went up just a few hours ago. How will the Antichrist deceive the end times world? The coming counterfeit miracles of the Antichrist. And in that, we go through how advanced technology could be used by the Antichrist to mislead the entire world and explain why the world worships the Antichrist and follows the Antichrist during the tribulation. So make sure to go by and check that out on brittgillette.substack.com if you haven't been by there and seen that yet. So back to what we're talking about today. This is absolutely insane. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about the ongoing escalation between the United States and NATO and Russia, or toward Russia. Russia, of course, is reciprocating that escalation, but it seems that the United States and NATO are really pushing it. So this is from Reuters. It says Russia condemns irresponsible talk of nuclear weapons for Ukraine. And I don't think it's by accident that they put this in quotes, right? It's Russia condemns, quote, irresponsible talk of nuclear weapons. They're mocking it and saying, what's the big deal? This isn't really irresponsible, but it absolutely is. It's beyond irresponsible. This is insane what we're seeing take place right here. So this says, discussion in the West about arming Ukraine with nuclear weapons is absolutely irresponsible, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said on Tuesday in response to a report in the New York Times citing unidentified officials who suggested such a possibility. And of course, nobody should be taking the New York Times seriously. Who are these unidentified officials? Call them out. They need to be kicked out of the government immediately, assuming they even exist and they're not just making this up. It says the New York Times reported last week that some unidentified Western officials had suggested U.S. President Joe Biden could give Ukraine nuclear weapons before he leaves office. Several officials even suggested that Mr. Biden could return nuclear weapons to Ukraine that were taken from it after the fall of the Soviet Union. That would be an instant and enormous deterrent, or escalation. But such a step would be complicated and have serious implications, the newspaper wrote. Yeah, serious implications, such as triggering nuclear war. Asked about the report, Peskov told reporters, quote, these are absolutely irresponsible arguments of people who have a poor understanding of reality and who do not feel a shred of responsibility when making such statements. We also note that all of these statements are anonymous. Exactly. Come out, say who you are, sign on the dotted line that you're for these policies that are bringing the whole world to the brink of nuclear war. But they mention, oh, Biden could return the nuclear weapons to Ukraine. Well, that's impossible because those nuclear weapons held by Ukraine over 30 years ago were returned to Russia, not the United States, not NATO. They were sent to Russia. Who knows if they even exist anymore, but those same nuclear weapons are not going to go back to Ukraine. So to supply Ukraine with nuclear weapons would mean the United States or NATO is supplying those nuclear weapons from its own arsenal, from the UK, from France, from the United States. How would that not be seen as an act of war and trigger nuclear war? I have no idea how that is going to happen. I don't believe it will happen, but we can't rule it out that it could happen because of articles like this in The Guardian. Ukraine war briefing. No red lines when it comes to support for Ukraine, says French foreign minister. Says the French foreign minister, Jean-Noël Barrot, has told the BBC in an interview that Western allies should not put any limits on support for Ukraine against Russia and, quote, not set and express red lines. So they're saying there's nothing we aren't willing to do to defeat Russia, including triggering nuclear war. His comments are significant, coming a few days after US and UK long-range missiles were used in that way for the first time. Britt said that Ukraine could fire French long-range missiles into Russia in the logics of self-defense, but would not confirm if French weapons had already been used. Quote, the principle has been set. Our messages to Zelensky have been well received, he said. France has supplied Ukraine with the Scalp missile, which is identical to the British-supplied Storm Shadow that Ukraine has reportedly already used inside of Russia. So now we have the United States, France, and the UK have supplied these long-range missiles to attack Russia, which require UK, French, and United States assistance, like targeting it. It's basically the United States, the UK, and France firing missiles into Russia. This risks nuclear conflict. Read a little bit lower in this article. It says Putin has threatened to launch more strikes using an experimental intermediate-range ballistic missile. And I would say it's not experimental. We looked at some of that video on Saturday that showed that strike, how quick it was. It was, I believe, 6 separate strikes from that one missile that then broke off into clusters that had 6 warheads in them. So 36 conventional warheads hit, but we could easily imagine that that missile was delivering a nuclear payload instead, and what would have happened as a result. It says Putin has threatened to launch more strikes using an intermediate-range ballistic missile as Ukraine decried the testing of the nuclear-capable weapon on its territory as an international crime. Speaking at a defense conference on Friday, Putin contested U.S. claims that Russia possessed only a handful of the high-speed ballistic missiles. This is like last month when they said, well, it's only a few apartment complexes that the Venezuelan gangs have taken over in Colorado. No problem. Just a handful, right? It's like, oh, just a handful of nuclear missiles of these types. You know, we know that you have hundreds upon hundreds more. It could destroy all of Europe, all of the United States. But it's just a handful, right? A handful of high-speed ballistic missiles, saying that the military had enough to continue to test them in combat conditions and would put them into serial production. Quote, the test of the missile system have passed successfully, and I congratulate you all on that, Putin said, according to the Interfax news agency. So we just see escalation after escalation. We see first this, we're going to give nuclear weapons to Ukraine. Now there's no red line that we won't cross, including such as this, which we read in Eurasia Daily. NATO is discussing the possibility of preemptive strikes against Russia. It says NATO is discussing the possibility of preemptive precision strikes on the territory of Russia in the event of an armed conflict with the alliance countries. This was stated at a conference in Brussels by the head of the military committee of the bloc, Admiral Rob Bauer. He called positive the fact that NATO has changed its attitude to the essence of the organization as a defense alliance, as well as the perception that it is necessary to, quote, sit and wait for us to be attacked, and only then react. Quote, it's more competent not to wait, but to hit launchers in Russia in case Russia attacks us. A combination of precision strikes is needed that will disable the systems that are used to attack us, and we must strike first, Bauer said, quoted by Bloomberg. You know, as if taking out some of these land-based launchers just defangs Russia. They no longer have a nuclear capability. They will clearly have a nuclear capability that can't be taken out. They have underwater sub capability. This is insanity. This escalation, and it continues. We read this in the Kiev Post. UK and France troop deployments to Ukraine are in discussion. It says the UK and France might deploy troops to Ukraine in light of Donald Trump's upcoming return to the White House in January. So this is political. There's no grave threat to the world as a result that requires these troops, but oh no, Donald Trump might become president, so we need to start World War III. As reported by French news outlet Le Monde on Monday, citing an unnamed British military source, the discussions to deploy Western troops rekindled in November when British Prime Minister Starmer visited France for World War I commemorations. Quote, discussions are underway between the UK and France on defense cooperation, particularly with a view to creating a hard core of allies in Europe focused on Ukraine and wider European security, the source told Le Monde. The outlet also cited a comment France's foreign minister made to BBC on November 23rd, in which he said Paris does not discard any option. So that's in addition to saying there's no red lines, we'll do anything regarding troop deployments in Ukraine. Le Monde said the classified discussions were prompted by Trump's return to office and the anticipated decreased support from Washington to Kiev. So we're going to ramp this up and start World War III because Donald Trump would try to negotiate and end a peaceful resolution to this war. It added that Paris has not approved troop deployments to Ukraine, though proposals have clearly been on the table for several months. Nothing has been revealed publicly at present about the number of troops, timing, or location allegedly proposed or discussed. Le Monde said that French President Emmanuel Macron championed Western troop deployments earlier this year, a notion that met fierce opposition from other European countries, such as Germany, for fear of escalation with Moscow. While the UK and France have been training Ukrainian troops within their territories, troop deployments have been a taboo subject. That said, it's widely believed that Western advisors are already in Ukraine to help adjust and coordinate Kiev's strikes using Western weaponry, which again is more escalation. We see escalation after escalation. Where does all of this lead? Well, let's go look at this article right here from the Daily Reckoning. This is by Jim Rickards from back in June. And I think it's important to go back and look at articles like this that are in a different context, away from today's events, so that you know it's not hyperbole, it's not clickbait. This is a real issue that we're facing right now, the real threat of escalation that leads to nuclear war. And he titles this, Are They Trying to Start a Nuclear War? And I believe they are. We talked about this on Saturday. It's absolutely insane. It says the steady path toward World War III continues. U.S. and NATO support for Ukraine in the war with Russia has been one long failure, but that hasn't stopped them from escalating the war with new weapons and tactics. Russia has met the escalation with its own escalation every step of the way. At what point do rational leaders in the West, if there are any left, pause, consider that the war is lost in Ukraine, de-escalate, and seek a treaty to end the war? There's no sign of that yet. And again, this is back in June, and there's definitely no sign right now because they're escalating almost on an hourly basis. In fact, all the signs point to further escalation, which is a sure path to nuclear war. That's what war games over decades of planning have taught us. What good has escalation accomplished? The West supplied Ukraine with HIMARS, precision-guided artillery, but that largely failed because the Russians quickly learned how to jam the GPS guidance system, so the missiles went off course. That doesn't mean the Russians shoot down or jam every HIMARS rocket Ukraine launches. Some will always get through, but overall their effectiveness has been limited compared with expectations. The US and NATO also supplied Ukraine with Abrams, Leopard, and Challenger tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles that have been left burning on the battlefield. They also required intensive maintenance Ukraine can't necessarily provide and are often unsuited for the battlefield conditions in Ukraine. Many Ukrainian soldiers have actually expressed a preference for Russian-made equipment over NATO's. And of course, now we see these ATACMS missiles, Storm Shadows. Those are coming in. They're going to save the day, we're told. They escalate the conflict, yet largely, how effective are they? And I think what this is showing, again, it's showing the conventional military capabilities of the United States and NATO, and conventional military capabilities in general are obsolete in the face of today's modern weaponry, specifically in the age of drones. And so it's exposing many of the vulnerabilities of the US military to the enemies of the United States and the enemies of NATO. It's absurd. But this goes on and begins in this. I want to read from this section about don't worry, because I've heard many people say, oh, don't worry. You know, we've done a couple of these videos so far over the past week. And the comments are filled with people saying, they're not going to do anything. Putin hadn't done anything yet. He's not going to do anything. This is no big deal. And I certainly hope that's the case. But I think that it's an enormous mistake to assume that nothing terrible will happen as a result of this, because this is very irresponsible what's taking place. How we're being brought to the precipice of nuclear war over these various political reasons that aren't an existential threat to the countries involved are being, it's absurd. But it says proponents of escalation dismiss these concerns, saying we've already crossed multiple red lines. That's what I've been hearing people say. And again, remember, this is back in June, and Russia hasn't directly retaliated against us. Maybe against Ukraine, but not us. We can therefore go ahead and cross another red line, and the Russians won't do anything. First off, that just provides more evidence that Putin isn't some bloodthirsty maniac who can't be deterred. He obviously can be, and clearly recognizes the dangers of escalation. He doesn't want war with the United States and NATO. Why would he? Secondly, and more importantly, NATO's arming and equipping of Ukraine was never a red line for Russia. Western observers simply assumed that providing HIMARS, ATACMS, and tanks would be red lines for Russia, but Russia never specifically said they were. They warned about the overall threat of escalation, but these weren't specific red lines. But direct attacks on Russian soil are a different matter. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Putin himself have issued specific warnings about NATO facilitation of attacks within Russia itself. That's the difference. And guys, that's what we've seen in the past week. And that's why this is so dangerous, and it's complete insanity. Here's what Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, had to say. Russia regards all long-range weapons used by Ukraine as already being directly controlled by servicemen from NATO countries. This is not military assistance. This is participation in a war against us. And such actions could well become a cause of war. Nobody today can rule out the conflict's transition to its final stage. Doesn't take a genius to understand what he means by the conflict's final stage. Now, Medvedev often issues provocative statements, but listen to the comments of Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rybakov. It's about as strongly worded as a diplomatic statement can get. He says, I would like to warn American leaders against miscalculations that could have fatal consequences. For unknown reasons, they underestimate the seriousness of the rebuff they may receive. And then Rickards writes, except the reasons aren't unknown, it's because the West is led by incompetent and reckless people who don't know what they're doing. They don't understand that they're playing with fire. And then he goes on with how nuclear war starts, because it's what we're seeing happen this past week is how nuclear war starts. He states, I began studying nuclear warfighting in 1969 and have continued my studies for decades, which includes all the leading thinkers about nuclear war. While the experts disagree in certain respects, they all agree on one thing. The most likely path to nuclear war is escalation. No one wakes up and says, nice day for a nuclear war, let's start one. Instead, war will be the result of a process of one side raising the stakes, the other side responding in kind, and escalating further, and so on in successive rounds until one party is backed into a corner and has no choice but to use nuclear weapons in an existential response. Ironically, in that situation, the party that is less threatened may actually start the nuclear war in order to get the first strike advantage. The result is annihilation, not just World War III, but possibly the end of most human life on Earth. Those that survive would probably wish they hadn't. This is incomprehensible. Ukraine is trying to drag the U.S. directly into the war with U.S. boots on the ground. Events might not get that far. We may be destroyed in a nuclear World War III if this reckless escalation continues. Will anyone stop it? And I believe the answer is yes. We know, first off, we're not going to see annihilation and the end of most human life on Earth as a result of what's taking place right now, because we know that when Jesus returns at the end of the 7-year tribulation, humanity is still here. We also know that, in Revelation 6, we see large percentages of the world population die in a global war. However, it's nowhere near most all of human life on Earth. It's a good chunk of it. I mean, we're looking at, I guess in one case, a quarter of humanity and then a third of humanity, but not 99% of humanity or anything on that order. But we're talking very sobering numbers from what the book of Revelation tells us, as well as what could take place as a result of a nuclear war. So guys, this is, as he says, this is playing with fire. And he asks, will anyone stop it? My guess is that yes, Vladimir Putin will most likely be the one to stop it, as he sees, if I can hold on until Trump gets into office, this escalation will stop. He doesn't want to die in a nuclear war either. But these escalations, again, it's almost hourly at this point, where they're trying to start World War III. And this is just because that won't lead to the end of most human life on Earth. It doesn't mean that something couldn't happen. Somebody will stop it. We know that. We may not know who it is, but we know from the Bible that this doesn't happen right now. But that doesn't mean that something bad doesn't happen right now, that something terrible doesn't happen. So what could happen? Well, we have this from Newsweek. It says, nuclear war simulator shows what war with Russia would look like. And this is from back in September 2022. So in the opening months of the war wasn't even a year old, but they went back and revisited a war game that was put together at Princeton. It says the Plan A simulation was originally prepared for an exhibition at Princeton's Bernstein Gallery in 2017 and was later made available to the public as a YouTube video in 2019. So all of this is before the current Russia-Ukraine war broke out. It says its aim is to highlight the, quote, potentially catastrophic consequences of a nuclear war between Russia and NATO. So what did they find? Well, you can watch this video. I encourage you to go check this out. It's on YouTube. It's just look up Plan A, Princeton. This will pop up. But they work through the scenario of what happens first, what happens second, what happens third, how this escalation leads to a nuclear war that doesn't destroy all of humanity, but we have 91.5 million casualties within an hour of the outbreak of this war, including 34.1 million fatalities, 57.4 million injuries, and that doesn't include deaths from nuclear fallout and other long-term effects that would significantly increase that estimate. We've seen other war games in the past that show a limited nuclear war in this region as a result of a war between Russia and Ukraine. I believe that was war gamed out a little over a decade ago and showed 1 billion people would die as a result of that from not just the direct attack, as this is pointing out, but also the aftermath of that. So guys, this is serious business. It's not being taken seriously by these crazy people who are in control, who are pushing this. It's outright insanity. You know, but it sets the stage, guys, because you can see if we have again, a limited nuclear war that only kills a couple 100 million people, not all of humanity, right? A couple 100 million die, or maybe a few tens of millions, right? They just so cavalier about this. We can see if something like that happens and then it stops at that point, doesn't go further, we can see how the world would be ripe for the emergence of a figure like the Antichrist to come on the world stage and establish peace, even at the expense of having a global empire that controls every aspect of your life. People might find that preferable to living in a world where nuclear warheads could rain down on them at any moment. So we can see the stage being set in that respect. But guys, we need have no fear, as we talked about in the previous videos on this subject. There's no need to fear any of this. All of this is just pointing to the signs of the times in which we live and that Jesus is coming back. So you should be filled with hope and joy in anticipation of Christ's return. But this is crazy. We need to be praying every day that God will hold this back and that nuclear war is not triggered as a result of this escalation. And we need to be praying for an end to this conflict, even if nuclear weapons are never a part of it, because already so many lives have been affected. Millions of lives have been directly affected as a result of this conflict. So make sure you're in prayer for this to end. Not sure why my voice just gave out. Hopefully I'm not getting sick. But make sure you're in prayer over an end to this war. And again, give thanks for what you have. Tomorrow will be, or not tomorrow, but the day after will be Thanksgiving here in the United States, where we give thanks to God for all the blessings He's given us in life. And the Bible says, be thankful and then come to God with all of your requests. He knows what our needs are. We should be asking for peace at this moment, guys. I'm praying for cooler heads to prevail and the insane people who are behind all of this to be taken out of power so that we don't face this prospect of continual escalation. But that's where we are right now. This is very serious. So we all need to be engaged in prayer. Again, I wasn't planning on doing this video, but all of this news started coming in. So this will take the place of tomorrow's normal Wednesday video. And then we'll have Thanksgiving on Thursday. So regular video back again on Friday, God willing. And so let me know what you think. Leave your comments below. Make sure to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. Otherwise, I will see you on Friday, God willing. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to visit my Substack at brittgillette.substack.com. There you'll find my latest videos and articles, as well as notes, where I share the latest news headlines, the articles I'm reading, and the videos I'm watching. Subscribe for free, and each new post on Substack will be sent directly to your email. Just scroll to the bottom of the homepage and hit the subscribe button. As an added bonus, your first welcome email will include a link to a copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt Gillette on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.